hopefully you've had some snack and had a chance to refresh yourself. We are going to get started very soon, and Howard Hay is going to be our facilitator for our next session. Just wanted to remind you that we after the session, we'll have lunch, and then after lunch, we will go into the final session. But at the end of that session, we're going to bolt it out of here, and we're going to walk, if it's possible for everyone to walk, down to the Maritime Museum along the waterfront. If you have been traveling back and forth, the waterfront is really beautiful. It's flat. There's no cars, and so it's a nice way to walk. But the plan for the Blue Nose sales this afternoon involves, first of all, we have to have a safety briefing for all of us, and you all have your sale number in your tag, so bring this with you. And if it says sale 1, don't trade it with somebody that has sale 2, because there's a manifest for the Blue Nose, and you have to match. And they are expecting everyone who has a sale 1 to be on sale 1, and vice versa. So that's important. If you don't have you might want a sweater or something, so at lunchtime you might want to go get something if you don't have something, or shoes or whatever. But we're going to go to the Maritime Museum. It shouldn't take more than a half hour to walk down there. As soon as we get there, they're going to give us a safety briefing to all of us at once. And it won't take too long, but then the first sale 1 is going to board the vessel, and that will take maybe about 15 minutes to board, because they do need to make sure that you are the person, and that if somebody doesn't show up, they also need to note that. If you are on the second sail, we have our ship CSS Acadia right on the same jetty on the north side of the jetty, and there'll be some refreshments there. You're welcome to hang out on the ship. The museum is still open, so if you would like to go in and look at the museum, you can. I will tell you later on today, before then, exactly what time you have to be back to the Blue Nose. The Blue Nose is going up for 2 one-hour sails, so it won't be you won't have a lot of time to mill about if you are on the second sail. I think there'll be plenty for you to do and relax and take it in. And so those are the key points I wanted to point out right now. I'm going to hand it over to Howard.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Howard Hagee. I'm the president and CEO at the Mariners Museum and Park in Newport News, Virginia. The theme of this next hour is from Canada to the world, and our speakers are going to range from history to museum practice. The way we're going to handle this session is we're going to go through each of the talks first, and then wait until the very end to have questions for everyone. So if you have a question from the first speaker, be sure to jot it down so that you don't forget it. And then our third speaker is going to be virtual. There's a video. He's not live streaming, so we won't have the opportunity to ask him questions, but we will be incorporating a video at the end. My role is to introduce everyone and then to get out of the way. So in that spirit, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dan Conlin, who will give a presentation on the SS St. Louis, the Ship of Fate. Dan Conlin is the curator at the Canadian Museum of Immigration at Pier 21 in Halifax. Born in Nova Scotia, he studied journalism and history at Carleton University in Ottawa, where he received his Bachelor of Journalism. Dan worked as a producer at CBC Radio before he returned to do a master at St. Mary's University in 1996. He was curator at the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic for 19 years, where he curated many of their most successful exhibits, including the still popular Titanic display, and played a lead role in the museum's groundbreaking LGBTQ exhibition, Hello Sailor. He also did a pirates exhibit in 2007, which led to his first book, Pirates of the Atlantic, Robbery, Murdery, and Mayhem off Canada's East Coast. He joined the Canadian Museum of Immigration at Pier 21 in 2014, where he manages the museum's temporary and traveling exhibitions. His most recent book is War Through the Lens, the Canadian Army Film and Photo Unit, 1941 to 1945. So please join me in welcoming Dan Conlin.
Thank you very much, Howard. I have a paper about a very serious topic, but I'm going to wear my exhibitions hat for just a moment and mention two shows since you're here at the Canadian Museum of Immigration Pier 21. The World of Josef Karsh is an amazing photo exhibit on our first floor. Josef Karsh is the legendary portrait photographer, an Armenian refugee who created all those iconic images that you have in your head when you think of Winston Churchill, Ernest Hemingway, and we've got 110 of Karsh's work downstairs, including the portrait of the last sailmaker of St. John, New Brunswick, and Edward Steichen, the famous World War II naval photographer. So that's one exhibit. The other exhibit is if you're using the washrooms up here, we have an exhibit in both the men's and women's washrooms about hygiene and immigration, to sort of making you kind of think about sort of washroom and toilet issues in the world of immigration. So there's an exhibit you can take just when you're on your break. But I'm going to be speaking about the Jewish refugee ship St. Louis in 1939. And just a show of hands, how many people know the St. Louis story, this refugee ship from 39? Okay, that gives me a good sense. In many ways, it's a powerful, well-known story of anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. A ship with almost 1,000 Jewish people fleeing Europe on the eve of the Second World War, seeking to escape Nazi Germany, and being turned away by everyone in North America, the United States, all the Latin American countries, and in the end, Canada. It's a powerful story that's become better known in many years, but there's some very significant Canadian connections which are often overlooked. St. Louis made her first voyage to Halifax, to this very terminal that we're now occupying at this conference. She made her last voyage to Halifax in 1939, and her infamous refugee voyage had intimate connections with Canada and Canada's immigration policy. I'm going to review those and also share a few pitfalls if you're a museum that's looking at the St. Louis story, a couple things you should kind of watch out for that we learned as we discussed the story. So the motor ship St. Louis was part of the post-war rebuilding program of the Hamburg America line, a giant German ocean liner, often one of the biggest ocean liner companies in the North Atlantic. They were rebuilding their World War I losses, and they invested money in two new ships, the St. Louis and the Milwaukee, both named after cities in the United States with large immigrant German populations. And these were state-of-the-art ships. They were motor ships, so they were leaving the world of coal-fired steamships with and was one of the first big introductions of a pair of ships using diesel engines, which were more economical, they were cleaner, and were kind of the world of the future. Cunard was experimenting the same time with Georgic and Britannic with a pair of diesel ships as well. Because they were diesel, they didn't need those big shotgun smokestacks or funnels that you see on the traditional steam-powered liners. They had a radically different streamlined look, and they were sort of the future at sea. Hamburg American Line emphasized the modernity of their sort of new look, brilliant electric lights everywhere, state-of-the-art athletic facilities, so they were launched in 1928, the same year that Halifax launched its new immigration terminal, the building that you're sitting in now. Pier 21 was a brand new complex of integrated railway station, ocean liner terminal, and hotel, as you can see in the photo. Those of you who are staying at the Westin, there's your hotel. It was built as part of this whole complex. Enormous investment of the Canadian government to make Halifax a major international passenger terminal for ships and immigration center, Canada's Ellis Island, as it's sometimes referred to. So St. Louis and Pier 21 sort of began their lives in the same year. And St. Louis's maiden voyage in 1929 was from Hamburg, Germany to Halifax and then on to New York. And her first call at Pier 21 was a huge deal in Halifax. The Halifax Herald kind of wrote an enthusiastic editorial about seldom has any transatlantic liner ever departed directly for Halifax on her maiden voyage. This event is expected to arouse great interest throughout the city. She's one of the most modern motor ships afloat, especially constructed for the North Atlantic passenger trade for Canada and the United States. So they were really hoping that this would put Halifax on the map with its brand new facilities that had a pier so large it could take Queen Elizabeth and Queen Mary at the same time, end to end. And St. Louis was a good sign of a maiden voyage that she would put Halifax on the map. Now, however, as Pier 21 and St. Louis were beginning their careers, just as they began in full operation in 1929, the Great Depression hit. The world was plunged into economic crisis and mass unemployment. And one of the St. Louis's voyages in 1930, a family of Serbians arriving at Pier 21 aboard the St. Louis kind of encountered the changing face of immigration as the Great Depression kind of gripped hold of the world. The Bovidid families, they were kind of Christians from Serbia, but they were clearly Eastern European immigrants, and they had a vivid memory of their reception in Halifax. Paul Bovis, the son, kind of described the experience of arriving in Halifax in June 12, 1930. Along with the welcoming of 30 to 40 people, we were greeted with loud boos and shouts of, "Go back where you came from," and then a barrage of eggs and stale veggies. This fracas continued until police arrived and order was restored. So this is the land we heard so much about, of milk and honey. Being welcomed by so many citizens with eggs and spoiled greenie, he splattered all over the front deck of the boat, barely missing me. Prove one fact: Canada is the land of milk and honey and veggies. So hats off to the Bovid family for being stalwart in their arrival in a country that was gripping with this depression, but also this paranoia about immigrants coming to change society and steal jobs. And this caused the Canadian authorities to ratchet up the restrictions on immigration, and they plunged by 80%. So the levels of immigration as you go into the 30s, it's 1/5 of what it was before. And you can see that in St. Louis's visits. Her first year, she brought 1,000 immigrants to Canada through Pier 21. By 1930, it was about 83 immigrants, as the restrictions against immigrants arrived. And this would really imperil Jewish refugees who are trying to flee Nazi Germany after Hitler's National Socialist Party comes into power in 1934, that they find that there's an incredibly hostile approach to immigrants of all kinds coming to North America, and specifically Jewish people, because of the widespread anti-Semitism of the era. But St. Louis, as into the 1930s, all the other big shipping lines canceled their order books at shipyards. So St. Louis was actually one of the newest ocean liners afloat in the 1930s, and her engines made her very efficient and economical to run, and she kept calling at Pier 21, voyage after voyage in the 1930s. It's an amazing shot of St. Louis here at Pier 21. She's the ship on the left of the big black hull, Hamburg America Line twin funnels, and she's moored exactly where the Holland America Line Zandam is currently sitting outside of our reception room. So if we were here in 1939 when this picture was taken, you'd be looking up at St. Louis. And there she is with St. Louis on the left, Cunard's Corinthia in the center, and then Cunard's new motor ship, the Georgic, off on the other side. A very busy day at Pier 21. So St. Louis continues to come to Halifax year after year through the 1930s. Passenger levels really drop across the North Atlantic in the mid-30s, so she does some recreational cruises in between her transatlantic immigrant voyages, but keeps coming to Canada. And that sets her up for a unique voyage in 1939, May of 1939. Jews in Germany had been subjected to the Kristallnacht attacks in November of the previous year, where homes, businesses, and synagogues were attacked and burned. People were murdered, and it was the beginning of the escalating violence of the Holocaust. And many German families saw the writing on the wall and sought to leave, and there were enough of them that they booked a special voyage aboard the St. Louis to escape Nazi Germany and find sanctuary in North America. So 937 Jewish passengers boarded St. Louis in Cuxhaven next to Hamburg in May 13th, 1939, seeking sanctuary in North America. And they almost all had visas to land in Cuba, and thought they could use that as a base to find a safe home in North America, most of them seeking family and community connections in the United States. And so they left Hamburg on this voyage in May of 1939. And here's an example of, I always get, this photo always kind of chokes me up a bit. It's two Jewish families aboard the St. Louis, mid-voyage, heading to what they think is safety and freedom in North America. It's the Hyman and the Dublon families. And you can see how happy they are. They have escaped and they're heading to safety. And so you can see sort of the fellow at the center is Willie Dublon with his wife Erna, his brother Eric, and the two little girls Eva and Lori. So they're on this ship seeking what they think is going to be safety. However, when they arrive at Havana, they discover their visas mid-voyage had all been canceled. And only a handful of families who had transit papers directly to the United States are allowed to leave the ship, leaving 907 trapped on board in Havana Harbor. And at that point, a committee is formed among the passengers to try to find sanctuary somewhere. And working with the captain of the ship, Gustav Schroeder, who was a humanitarian and really sympathized with the plight of his passengers, this desperate search for a country who would take them began, with telegrams going out and lots and lots of denial replies coming back. The plight of these passengers made, huge international news. Most of the mainstream media coverage was positive, not so much the letters to the editor. And but first of all, the United States said no, and then every Latin American country that they contacted said no, and then Canada got involved. There were a number of Jewish members of parliament who petitioned the Canadian Prime Minister, as well as a group of historians and intellectuals from Toronto who put together a very kind of persuasive petition that they telegrammed to Canada's Prime Minister, William Lyon Mackenzie King. He was busy with a royal tour at the moment, but they kind of pitched this kind of appeal to, King, you're at a moment in history, you can make a difference. The world is kind of watching, and, out of Christian charity and a sense of citizenship, you should let these folks in. And so this was kind of an appeal put forward in, St. Louis was kind of just giving up in North America and starting to head back to Europe. Canada's Prime Minister was on the road at the time. He was moved by this enough to send messages back to Ottawa to his officials and cabinet saying, well, okay, what are my options here? What could we do? And unfortunately, he had some deeply anti-Semitic cabinet ministers. Also, particularly the Director of Immigration of Canada, a fellow named Frederick Blair, just hated Jewish people. And they quickly persuaded Mackenzie that there would be a deep political cost to pay for allowing these folks in. And King decided to do nothing. And the petitioners got a message weeks later after St. Louis had to return to Europe saying, we got your appeal, but we can't, we've made successions for some small numbers of Jewish families. Procedures don't allow us to do more. And Canada said no. And the ship then had to return, Canada was their kind of last hope for sanctuary, and had to return to Europe in a despondent return voyage. The committee had to form suicide watch for a lot of families, and Captain Gustav Schroeder actually kind of cooked up a plan. He was going to run the ship aground on the southern coast of England so that they wouldn't have to face returning to Nazi Germany. In the end, there was a last-minute diplomatic solution of sorts. 4 European countries, the Netherlands, Belgium, France, and Great Britain, agreed to take the passengers of St. Louis. And so the ship returned to Antwerp instead of Hamburg, and then families had to make this choice about which of these 4 countries do we go to. So it was temporary sanctuary, but this was on the eve of World War II, and so 3 of those countries were overrun by the Nazis the next year with the occupation of Europe, and then these families were on the run again and facing the Gestapo, the SS, and the death camps. So it's a grim story, and it's a real kind of thought-provoking story about how you reply to an international refugee crisis. Ironically, even though the war was almost there was sort of only 2 months left, St. Louis managed to make a few extra voyages to the New York World's Fair and to some Caribbean voyages. And this is a postcard from the collection of the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic from St. Louis's last voyage in August, late August of 1939, where she went to Halifax, took a bunch of people to the New York World's Fair, and then the war broke out, trapping her briefly in New York until she was able to escape back to Germany before the British naval blockade went in to reply. And this is a postcard that was sent by somebody on board the St. Louis on that final voyage, purely recreational. There were no immigrants aboard. It was just Canadians going off to see the New York World's Fair. And there's a powerful note on this, this voyage that gives you an idea just how deep and widespread anti-Semitism was in North American culture. It's some anonymous Canadian vacationing family, and they talk about what a nice ship it is, and no one's been seasick. Lovely staterooms, good food, nice crowd, no Jews. And this was a postcard that sort of was written after all that media coverage about these desperate refugees. And here's a Canadian couple saying it's great, they've gotten rid of all the Jewish people on this ship. And it gives you an idea of just sort of how profoundly anti-Semitism was shared in Canadian society at the time. The ship, St. Louis, as I mentioned, Schroeder managed to get it back into Germany, spent the rest of the war tied up at the port of Kiel being used as a temporary naval barracks, was sort of bombed and burnt out by Allied bombers in 1944, used for a bit of post-war hotel accommodation, and then was finally scrapped in 1952. Now, the fate of the passengers, that was uncertain for many years. There were, 907 people divided among 4 countries, and the records of the death camps it took a long time to go through. But researchers have now determined that 254 of the 907 were killed by the Nazis, mostly murdered at Auschwitz and Sobibor death camps, including the entire Dublon family. They all perished, mostly at Auschwitz. So those are 254 people that someone in North America, including Canada, could have given a refuge and safety to. This wasn't until 2010 that we got the full number. People had speculated over the years, but we now know that just under 30% of the passengers who returned to Europe were killed in the Holocaust. The 2010 book Refuge Denied by Sarah Miller and Scott Miller really gave us a fine sense of that number. Now, there are a few mysteries that remain about St. Louis, and one is we don't know that the passengers ever contacted the Canadian government directly. The passengers frantically contacted Washington, Mexico City. Here's a telegram they sent to Paris trying to find sanctuary, but nobody's found a paper trail of them petitioning the Canadian government. Maybe there's one out there, we haven't found it yet. And there are many stories of Jewish families who managed to escape to North America through Pier 21, and some probably aboard St. Louis in previous voyages. We don't really know their stories either, and there's some more stories to be told there. There are also some myths. This is a classic image. You'll see this all the time portraying St. Louis, and it's often captioned as sort of Jewish families arriving at Havana Harbor, hopefully looking for sanctuary. And it's actually 2 people arriving in the state of Israel in 1949 at Haifa Harbor. But it's such a powerful image. And mea culpa, when we did the first version of St. Louis Ship of Fate at the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic, we used this photo, which was in Voyage of the Damned, the classic book at that time, and was on the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum site as being St. Louis. We now know that it's not, so beware that. And there's also a classic image of St. Louis in Hamburg Harbor that's often used to portray St. Louis as in Havana to beware of. So I'll just kind of close with, there's a famous quote from this era that sums up Canadian immigration policy called "None is too many." It's often attributed to the Canadian Prime Minister or the immigration director, Frederick Blair. When he was asked how many Jews should come to Canada, he said none is too many at the time of the St. Louis. It was actually a remark made after the war in 1945, after the facts of the Holocaust had become known. And so it's actually a later remark, but it really emphasizes just how deep some of the hostility towards Jewish people existed in the Canadian Immigration Service. And so I realize I've gone over, so I'm going to hand things back to the panel.
Great. Thank you, Dan, for sharing the tragic story of the St. Louis refugees. Our next speaker is David Jenkins, who's going to speak to us about slate, salt cod, and schooners, a Welsh-Canadian maritime link. David is an honorary research fellow at the Museum of Wales and has a BA, PhD in history from Wales. He is also honorary research fellow of the Department of History and Classics at Swansea University. Fellow of the Society of Antiquaries of London, member of the editorial board of Folklife, and a member of the British Commission for Maritime History. His main research interests are in Welsh merchant shipping history from circa 1750 to the present day. His publications include books and articles related to this theme. Specialized in the history of Cardiff's tramp shipping industry, looking at such aspects as the development of the local ship owners association, individual ship owners such as Sir William Reardon Smith, and the history of shipping companies founded at Cardiff by natives of the coastal communities of North and West Wales in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Please join me in welcoming David Jenkins.
Bore da bawb, good morning everybody, bonjour. I want to speak this morning at a totally historic lecture, nothing to do with museums, but it does have important links with one of the founders of this organisation, which I think is particularly appropriate in this year, namely, of course, Basil Greenhill. So, here's Wales. Sorry, I don't have a pointer, but if you look in the armpit of Cardigan Bay, you will see Porthmadog. Right in the sort of centre top. And it's this port at which, between 1893 and 1914, a series of remarkable schooners known as the Western Ocean yachts were built, and they had very, very close connections with this part of the world. But it's slate that begins our story. 12 miles inland from Porthmadog, you have the slate quarrying town of Blaenau-Ffestiniog. And this is a typical landscape of Blaenau-Ffestiniog in the early 20th century. It's known as the piss pot of Wales, but one of the good things about that is that you've got gallons and gallons of water to drive all your machinery in the mills. And then Porthmadog itself developed as a port from 1823 onwards. You can see in the foreground here the exit of the river Glaslyn, which had been dammed from the sea to reclaim land, and it was this fact that the river flowed through this narrow gap, scoured out a harbour, that created Porthmadog from the 1820s onwards. And another important connection was the opening in 1836 of a narrow gauge railway from Porthmadog from Blaenau-Ffestiniog down to Porthmadog, and steam traction was employed from the mid-1860s onwards, including these unique double-ended engines engineered by Robert Fairley. And of course, the line is still open today as a tourist attraction, one of the oldest operating railway companies, continually operating railway companies in the world. Slate is an awkward cargo. It's heavy, it's brittle. You've got to load it in by hand. You can't just tip slate into a ship. So you pack it tightly so it doesn't move, but don't pack it too tightly or you open the seams of your ship up and you've obviously got problems. So, but anyway, as I say, from the early 1890s onwards, this was the port at which these ships were built. And you can just about see the shipyard, see the schooner in the right foreground, with her four topmasts is pointing at one of the two yards, those of David Williams and David Jones, at which these unique vessels were built around the turn of the 19th century, 20th century. And here is one of them. And as you can see, they were elegant vessels. Even though they were practical cargo carriers, they were also extremely elegant vessels. And this is the William Pritchard on the River Elbe in the early 20th century. Why on the River Elbe? Well, in 1842, there had been a massive fire in Hamburg, which absolutely flattened the city, pretty similar to the Great Fire of London in 1666. And some of the agents of the slate quarries in North Wales were out there pretty quickly saying, look, we've got this wonderful stuff that you could put on the roofs of your new buildings when you go on to build them. And so started the long tradition of taking slate from North Wales to Hamburg, to Bremerhaven, to Bremen, also to Copenhagen. Now, here we see the elegance of the vessels, but they also had to be tough, chunky vessels. Here is another of them, the M.A. James, at low tide in Ilfracombe in North Devon in the 1930s. And you can see that massive, deep, powerful hull that was needed for the trade in which these vessels began to work in the 1890s. And so, what happened? These vessels were built for a trade, a massive triangular trade. They would leave Porthmadog in the spring with a cargo of slate up to Hamburg or other places in northern Germany. They would then ballast down to Cadiz in Spain, discharge ballast, load salt, then straight out across the Atlantic to Newfoundland, Labrador, Nova Scotia, with salt for the salt fish trade. At that time, of course, the Grand Banks were still swarming with cod, and there was a demand for the dried and salted cod of North America, particularly in the southern Catholic countries of Europe. And at one time, no home in Porthmadog would have been complete without an Italian ship portricist. This is the work of Luigi Roberto, showing one of the Porthmadog schooners entering Naples. And ship portraits such as these would have been typical of any best parlour in Porthmadog at that time. The ships continued to be built until 1913. They were locally owned, locally financed. Amongst the investors of them were a certain Mr. David and Mrs. Margaret Lloyd George. Because they were from the area. The last of them, the Gestiana, was built in 1913. Here she is at the day of her launch. You can see the bottle hanging down. The lady that swung the bottle failed to break it. That was seen as bad news. And indeed, on her maiden voyage to Labrador the following year, the Gestiana was washed ashore and smashed to bits. But an even greater storm, of course, came later in August 1914 with the outbreak of the First World War, and that, of course, shattered the slate trade to Germany. So, this was the end of Porthmadog as a ship-owning port, but it wasn't the end of Porthmadog. It wasn't the end of the Western Ocean yachts, because a lot of them were sold away from Porthmadog in the post-war years. And here we have another link with Basil Greenhill, because some of the vessels were bought by the wonderful Captain Bill Slade of Appledore in North Devon, who ran these vessels right up until the Second World War. And here's the M.A. James, and you can see the changes that he's made to her. He's taken down the yards from the fore topmast, and you can just about see a cloud of smoke erupting from the side of the hull alongside the mizzen mast. Well, that's actually, sorry? Oh, I'm sorry. Duh. Remember what I just said, but you can see the cloud of smoke appearing. Now, the ship isn't on fire. It's one of those notoriously dodgy, awkward Bollinger diesel engines, which you had to get a blow lamp to get going. But at least it meant that the ships could motor through calms and so make them profitable. The few remaining ones were requisitioned during the Second World War to serve as barrage balloon mooring barges in Portsmouth and Plymouth Naval Dockyards, where basically they fell to bits. But thankfully, we do know a lot about them, because Emrys Hughes compiled a list not only of all the ships built at Porthmadog, but also all the ships that traded to Porthmadog. He did this when he was home. Poor Dab, he spent his whole entire career as a sanitary inspector for Chorley in Greater Manchester, but came back regularly to Porthmadog to put this list together. And together with Aled Eames, our great North Walian maritime historian, who was also a great friend of Basil's, they put together this wonderful record, so the ships may be gone, but they're not forgotten. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much, David. You also did a very good job of getting us closer to back on time. In that spirit, our next speaker is a virtual presentation. As I said earlier, it's actually a video, and so to save a bit of time, I will also ask you to virtually review his bio. I will just say that Jeff Noakes has been the second World War historian at the Canadian War Museum since mid-2006, and the video that we're about to watch is a presentation titled "The Canadian War Museum and Canada's Current and Historic Engagement with the Sea." Fantastic, thank you. All right, so if we figure that out, we'll play it here at the end. But I did want to take the opportunity to introduce our next speaker, Eric Ruff. Eric Ruff, FCMA, is the Curator Emeritus of the Yarmouth County Museum, where he served as Director and Curator between 1974 and 2005. Importantly, and the most important fact of the entire panel this morning, he was born in a pub in England in 1945. He grew up near Birmingham and later Hamilton, Ontario. He graduated from the Royal Military College in Kingston, Ontario, and in 1968 took part in a transatlantic race on the Yawl Pickle. As an officer in the Canadian Navy, he served aboard HMC ships Saguenay and Nipigon from 1968 until 1971. Eric was named a Fellow of the Canadian Museums Association in April of 2001. Married to Barbara, he is also a member of the internationally renowned ensemble, the Yarmouth Shantymen. Please join me in welcoming Eric Ruff.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about ship paintings, ship portraits. Now I know some of you think once you've seen one, you've seen them all. I'll try to convince you otherwise. This is a map of the maritime provinces, and you can see Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island there. And all those little marked villages or towns are shipbuilding or ship-owning centers in the late 1800s. You can see Halifax in the middle of Nova Scotia, where we're sitting right now. You can see Yarmouth circled down in the southwest, which is where I'm from. And over in New Brunswick, you can see St. John, New Brunswick, which was a major shipbuilding and ship-owning port in the late 1800s, and the small village of St. Martin's. Now, St. Martin's had a population of about 3,000 people, but she built over 500 vessels of various sizes throughout the 1800s. And in the 1860s, 70s, and 80s, she built over 100,000 tons of shipping. Canada, in between the late 1870s and early 1880s, was the fourth largest shipping nation in the world, after Great Britain, the United States, and Norway. It's not bad for a country which had only really become a country a few years earlier in 1867. Nova Scotia owned most of the tonnage, 41.45%, and I'm very pleased to say that Yarmouth, Nova Scotia was the second largest port of registry in Canada after the St. John, New Brunswick in 1878-79. Very important. The Yarmouth County Museum is a small general history museum with an emphasis on shipping, and I'm very pleased to say that the Yarmouth County Museum has the third largest collection of ship portraits in Canada after the New Brunswick Museum and the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic here in where we are now. So the third largest, and I guess that's why I'm interested in ship paintings. Okay, so once you've seen one, you've seen them all. This is a good example of why people think that way. But a good curator can look at this painting, learn a lot about how the sails are set, learn about the rigging, learn about the placement of the men on deck, the deck furniture, and so on. And it's a great way to learn. And I used to look at new portraits and try and find mistakes, and I have found a few mistakes. Here's another one that might be once you've seen one, you've seen them all, but this is probably the most famous ship built in Canada, and she was the fastest ship in the world in 1851. This is the Marco Polo. The famous Marco Polo went from Liverpool to Australia and back in under 6 months. We have this painting in our collection, and I think it's one of the few paintings that were done of the Marco Polo in her time. We have it because the captain on this particular voyage, Captain Amos Crosby, had taken the ship from Mobile, Alabama, where this painting was done, to Liverpool just before the vessel was purchased by James Bain and became one of the Black Ball Line and became famous. So, nice painting. Another one, once you've seen one, you've seen them all, but what you can learn from this painting, you can see the house flag at the top of the mainmast, and you know instantaneously that this painting was done for the master of the ship. Here's another painting of this is the county of Yarmouth, by the way, which was built about 40 miles from Yarmouth up what we call the French shore. She was the largest vessel built in Canada at the time, 2,154 tons. That only lasted a couple of years until she was built by another vessel larger was built. But this painting was owned by the captain, and you can see that from the caption. But also you can see that it wasn't owned by the owner, it was owned by a family man, because you can see two of his children on the deck here. This painting apparently scares children. And it's a marvelous painting. And here's a bit more close-up of it. And one of the things that I came to appreciate computers for is you can put this picture on a computer and blow it up and learn all sorts of fabulous details in this painting. It's called the Mizpah, by the way, and it was in a hurricane in 1882, pardon me. You can see 3 men climbing up the mainstay. What are they doing there? Very peculiar. Turns out that eventually I found an article about this particular passage in the New York Maritime Register, and the deck was so often full of water, slopping back and forth, that they climbed the mainstay to get out of the water. In this one, you can see that the main yard has been overpainted, and it's it's a bit curious because this painting, the voyage took place in 1882, but the painting is signed 1884. And the captain who commissioned this painting wasn't aboard that ship in 1884, but he was in another ship going to Altona, or near Hamburg, where the painting was done. And so I think he corrected the painting and said, I need that yard to be a little more skewed. What I like best, and I didn't notice this until I found it on a computer, there's a man in the water there, and the man on deck is throwing the guy in the water a line, and I had to learn who this man was, because in the crew records, the same number of crew arrived at the destination as left. So it turned out it was the mate, and they got him safely back on board. So here's another ship portrait. This is Hong Kong, and this was owned by the captain. And you can see in the top left corner, the captain, his wife, his daughter, and off to the left is their son, who had his first shave aboard this voyage. And he kept a diary, and so we can learn all sorts of things from the diary. For example, the top right-hand picture, that light gray vessel with a strange bowsprit is the Empress of Japan. And he mentioned going aboard the Empress of Japan. He also mentioned the boat which is tied astern, named the owner of the boat, his wife, and all of his children. And he named some of the Royal Navy vessels in the background there. And the lower right is a group of Chinese warships. Some of you who may have been to the conference in 2015 would likely have gone up the funicular railway. Well, it's shown in this painting. Anybody went there? Yeah, good, it was great. Now this is a painting that we don't have, and I would love it to come to the museum. A replica or a copy of the painting will be going to the museum. And this is a picture of the Voyage of Many Rudders, which used to be in the readers of Canadian children. And you can see the mate, 16 years old, over the stern trying to fix the rudder. While we don't have the painting, we have a gold watch which was given to the mate by some of the merchants in Greenock, where the ship eventually got to. You can see a sextant which was presented to him, and you can see a silver platter given to the captain. This is not a ship portrait, but there are several ships portrayed. This is Browse Island off the northwest coast of Australia, and you can see these vessels loading. And if you look even more closely, you can see the whole guano process, with the birds doing their thing, the guano being shipped down. And in the lower left corner, you can see a vessel called the Matterhorn, which was fully loaded, about to leave the next day before a hurricane hit the Browse Island area, and that ship was completely wrecked. All her crew were lost. The cat was found, and the cat was eventually reunited with the captain's wife in Germany. This is the Yarmouth ship in the picture. She was wrecked, not completely. None of the crew were lost. This is a painting of a Yarmouth vessel going into Liverpool, and she's wearing the flag signal, "Follow me," and you can see off to the right, there are a number of vessels following in her wake. The pilot could only get aboard one ship, and hence follow me. You can see she's going around the Perch Rock Fort and the Perch Rock or Black Rock Lighthouse around the corner into the Mersey. And close-up showing the men on the yard taking in the upper topsail, foretopsail. This is another painting done from a sketch by the captain. This shows a Yarmouth vessel putting out from the Downs. Apparently when wind came up from a certain quarter, the ships should leave the Downs, and this one did. When she got back, the other ships were wrecked. Again, lots of detail. There's a mistake in this one. This guy's climbing up both the windward and the leeward rigging. A Yarmouth ship struck by a steamer in the harbor, in the channel. The steamer was found to be at fault. You can see people getting the lifeboat ready to launch in case they needed it. This is a painting of a ship called the Balclutha. Anybody here from San Francisco? That vessel is now in San Francisco, but there were a couple of Yarmouth captains who were masters of her, including Captain Alfred Durkee and his wife. His wife had a child in the Indian Ocean while they were bound for San Francisco, so they gave her the name Inda Frances Durkee. This one shows the bowsprit, another mistake. See the pig pen just abaft the foremast? There's pigs in there. She's going up the channel past the White Cliffs of Dover. Those pigs would have been eaten long before. And here's the Balclutha at the San Francisco Maritime Museum. She didn't have a funnel. That's a vessel on the other side of the wharf. I love this painting. It's not a Yarmouth vessel, but the captain was Yarmouth, and so it's in our painting. And you can see a crew member at the top of the mast chopping away the rigging. You can see the captain with a hatchet in his hand. A lady's head is sticking out of the cabin door. That's his wife. And right by the mizzen mast, well, no, the main mast in this case, there's a young girl being tied to the mast so that she won't be swept overboard. And the lady that gave us this museum was the granddaughter of that child. Okay, I'm back to once you've seen one, you've seen them all. This is the Belmont, the last square rigger owned in Yarmouth. This is the captain's daughter, who I knew quite well because we had three ladies. When I started at the museum, we had three women who had sailed on their father's square riggers. This is Catherine. She used to come and help me polish brass. The child here taught me how to do cataloging, and she was aboard her father's ship. Here she is again with her aunt, who was sent to sea because she was seeing too much of the wrong man. I've just learned within the last few weeks that the painting in the background was done in Australia. Unfortunately, it was sold to the Italians with the ship, so we don't have it. Two or three paintings of ships with close-ups with the children. This is in the Firth of Clyde, showing roller reefing and reef points. Mistake in this one. I'll tell you about it later. If anybody wants to ask me about this watch, I'll tell you about that later. And I wanted you to see this one because towards the end of the Yarmouth period of sail, Yarmouth captains used to go and work for larger vessels and British vessels. This is the Walter H. Wilson, and this shows the connection with maritime museums because the figurehead of this ship is in the Allen Maritime Museum in Maryham. And thank you for your attention.
Okay, so we were unable to get the video working, but I think Jeff Noakes is staged to go live.
I believe I am live. Can you confirm that you can hear me at your end? Okay, great. Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for making the arrangements this way at the last moment. I'm about to start my presentation. And here we go. Okay, well, hello everyone, and thank you very much for being here, despite the technical challenges. I would like to start by thanking the conference organizers for helping to make all of this possible, and we'll begin with a few notes. The views and interpretations provided in this presentation do not necessarily reflect those of the Canadian War Museum or the Canadian Museum of History. While the presentation will be in English, I'll be happy to answer questions and discuss matters in either English or in French. I'm joining you virtually today from Ottawa, and before we proceed, I would like to acknowledge that our museum and the place I'm speaking to you from is located on the traditional, unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. I would also like to acknowledge that you are joining us today from many places, near and far, and acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. The Canadian War Museum, or CWM, is Canada's National Museum of Military History, which it examines in its personal, national, and international dimensions. The museum traces its origins back to 1880, when it consisted primarily of a collection of militia artifacts, and it opened at its new location on the Le Breton Flats site in downtown Ottawa on 8th May 2005, which we see here. Since its opening, the museum has welcomed approximately 500,000 visitors each year, although since 2020, those numbers have, of course, been significantly affected by the COVID pandemic. The CWM is located on a significant body of freshwater, the Kitchissippi, or Ottawa River, through which it is ultimately connected to the Atlantic Ocean. It is, however, at a significant distance from the sea, and many of its visitors, both in person and virtual, will have no direct experience of or connection with the sea. The museum's location also means that some aspects of maritime museums, such as the preservation and interpretation of large vessels, are not feasible undertakings. The museum includes permanent exhibitions, open storage and display of large artifacts, and space for special temporary exhibitions and public programs, as well as a military history research center that combines the museum's library and archives. The Canadian Experience Galleries present the military history of Canada from the earliest times to the present day, as well as Canada's history of honoring and remembrance. The galleries, along with public programs and educational activities, have been designed to emphasize the human experience of war, rather than privileging prominent political leaders and military commanders, or showcasing technology and weapons, although artifacts do, of course, feature. The CWM is also not a military service-specific museum, in the way that, for instance, the National Air Force Museum of Canada is, nor is it a part of the Department of National Defence. Instead, it's a part of the Crown Corporation that also includes the Canadian Museum of History. The CWM's permanent exhibition galleries use a generally chronological narrative that spans Canadian military history from earliest times, as I've mentioned, to the present day. There are thematic divisions within these galleries which do present and examine the maritime aspects of various conflicts and of peacetime military activities in their broader context. The CWM consequently presents Canada's historic and current engagement with the sea in a largely military history context through these permanent galleries, as well as through its collection of large military artifacts in the Le Breton Gallery, part of which is seen here. And this includes naval and maritime equipment and weapons, ranging from mines and torpedoes to a German automated weather station emplaced in Labrador by a U-boat during the Second World War, which is the collection of cylinders that we see at the center of the image here. The CWM's collections and acquisitions activities are also connected with helping to tell the stories of Canadians and Canada's historic and current engagement with the sea. These range from the personal and individual, including letters, photographs, and items of uniforms and personal effects, to larger artifacts, including weapons and equipment. For these larger artifacts, often transferred from the Department of National Defence, there is, of course, the ongoing challenge of their size, both for transportation as well as for conservation and display. In the museum's permanent galleries, Canada's engagement with the sea is presented in the context of Canada's wider military history, in both war and peacetime, and not as a standalone story or installation. This holds true both for the galleries as initially created and for various additions and upgrades installed since the opening of the museum in 2005. In the post-1945 gallery, for instance, this has included a substantial update relating to the Royal Canadian Navy and Maritime Command and the Cold War, involving more recently acquired artifacts and archival footage. In the Second World War gallery, this has involved updates relating to the Merchant Navy, including veterans' post-war advocacy for veterans' status and benefits. The museum has also drawn on newer museological approaches that seek to help convey the experiences of Canadians' engagement with the sea in various ways. Staff and external contractors recently developed an immersive, if you'll pardon the expression in this context, computer-animated video experience. Located in the middle of the section dealing with Canada's war at sea during the Second World War, the presentation is a dramatization of a Canadian corvette's nighttime encounter with a German U-boat in the North Atlantic, told from the perspective of the crew of a corvette escorting a convoy. The resulting animated film is based on actual events and draws on a range of resources, including published and archival sources, contemporary technical manuals, and artifacts in the museum's collections. Since the museum has a national mandate, it also engages in various outreach initiatives and activities, including online, temporary, and traveling exhibitions and educational activities that focus in part or as a whole on Canada's engagement with the sea. Some of these have taken advantage of synergies and partnerships, especially with significant anniversaries. This has included the Centennial of Canada's Navy in 2010, which led to the creation of a major online exhibition, as well as the creation of a traveling art exhibition drawing on the CWM's Beaverbrook collection of war art, and we see part of this on the right. And it's worth mentioning here that the war art collection, which contains thousands of works, includes official and unofficial art from both world wars and from the post-war period, and it's another way in which the CWM's collections can help it collect, examine, and present Canada's current and historical engagement with the sea. And this includes the CWM's ongoing involvement with the Canadian Forces Artists Program, including the exhibition of works by CFAP artists who have carried out their work while attached to the Royal Canadian Navy. The 100th and 75th anniversaries relating to the First and Second World Wars, talking again about anniversary connections, involved a number of special exhibitions, and this includes the recently closed Forever Changed, which presents the personal stories of Canadians involved with and affected by the Second World War, and that includes those who are directly or indirectly involved with the war at sea, and we see a number of their stories here. The CWM also creates and operates programs such as the Second World War Supply Line Program, which makes educational discovery boxes available free of charge to schools across Canada. It includes historical content, artifacts, and reproductions relating to various aspects of Canada's and Canadians' engagement with the sea and the war at sea in the wider context of the Second World War. Again, as part of this national outreach, the CWM has also collaborated with other museums in order to help present aspects of Canada's historical engagement with maritime activities in the sea. This includes Canada Under Attack, which was a traveling exhibition on the Battle of the St. Lawrence. It reflected many years of intensive local and personal research into the effects of the Second World War on Canadians and their local communities, undertaken by the Naval Museum of Quebec and the Musée de la Gaspésie, and this drew on local stories, artifacts, and images. In addition to helping to present elements of Canada's historical engagement with the sea in the context of the Second World War, the exhibition complemented the CWM's continuing emphasis on the personal experience of war and its coverage of Canada's military past. More recently, and this is a connection with Dan Conlin's talk earlier, the collaboration has included St. Louis Ship of Fate, a traveling exhibition whose story you've already heard about, so I won't repeat it at this time in the interest of staying timely. But it was produced by the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic, part of the Nova Scotia Museum, in collaboration with the Atlantic Jewish Council and Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, and involvement, of course, from people at Pier 21 and elsewhere. This exhibition presents the story that Dan's just spoken to you about. And so ultimately, while this was not explicitly an exhibition about military history, it was presented at the Canadian War Museum because it helped contextualize the beginning of the Second World War, the nature of Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, and also it helped Canadians learn about their country's engagement with the sea in the context of ocean travel and refugees. Now, I hope that this brief presentation and discussion has helped give an idea of some of the ways in which the Canadian War Museum examines and presents Canada's current and historical engagement with the sea in the context of its function as Canada's National Museum of Military History. I would, of course, be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jeff. So, Kim, maybe I'll invite you up that you can remind us of logistics for lunch. And while Kim's on her way up, I hope that the three of you won't mind hanging around by the stage here to answer any questions individually after the presentation. And folks, I hope you will join me in thanking Dan, David, Jeff, and Eric for their presentations this morning.
Thank you, everyone. So